my name is Mitch Tidwell, and I'm with SBTC Collegiate. And today we're talking about why college ministry is really more than college ministry. And I have with me today Mark Vance. How are you, Mark?
Excited to be with the SBTC, talking about college ministry. It's
nice,
great.
man. Thanks, dude. Mark is the lead pastor at Cornerstone Church in Ames, Iowa. And Mark, let's jump off this way. I know formerly, last time we had interviewed, you were the director of Salt Company. Mm-hmm. Now you're lead pastor. Yep. I want to just take a step back. I want to hear your story. Like, okay. Where was Mark Vance like before Salt Co? Like, what was your journey to be where you're at right now?
It was not a journey that I saw come in, but it's one that as I look back at the stepping stones, I'm like, oh, God uniquely prepared me for where I'm at and what I'm doing. So I grew up in a conservative Baptist home in Iowa, which is odd, actually. There's not a lot of Baptists in Iowa. But grew up around the gospel, loved the things of God, really fell in love with the things of God, I should say, like my junior year of high school. I moved from being a person who had knowledge about Jesus to a person who had a passion for the person of Christ. I couldn't get enough of Jesus. And so I resolved, I instantly literally read Ezra 7:10, and it became like my life verse. Ezra studied the law.
I've never heard anybody say that.
Really?
I read it.
Hey, man. Ezra studied the law of the Lord.
That's right.
To practice it, to do it, and then to teach his statutes and ordinances. I thought that's what I want to do. I want to know God. I want to live in his ways. I want to teach other people to know him. And so went into Bible college, learned the Bible, learned theology, loved teaching, but thought, I don't know if I can be a traditional pastor. I ended up landing in a non-traditional church as a worship leader and teaching pastors. That's what I did as part of their staff team for 5 years, and figured out I love people. I love teaching the Bible. And this odd thing kept happening in my life where university students kept intersecting with my path. And so I had an affinity for the next generation of leaders. I loved pouring into people. So just kept running into that. Eventually started a kind of college and career age ministry in Des Moines. And in that process, ran into these guys from this thing called the Salt Company. So that was about 9 years ago where I first met these Salt Company guys and started talking to them and realized, man, we have the same sort of heart. Ended up going up to take a class they were teaching at Cornerstone Church, and halfway through that class they offered me a job with the Salt Company, and I jumped onto their staff about 7.5, 8 years ago. So that's the narration up to Cornerstone, but I say that because I was just reading Psalm 37 this morning. Delight yourself in the Lord, he's going to give you the desires of the heart. And he says, there's this word the psalmist uses, he says, you're supposed to dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. And my story was not here's the strategic design of my life. God, I'm going to do this. I know it at 24. I didn't know that. I just knew I love Jesus. I want to live in his ways. I want to teach people his ways. And as I befriended faithfulness in the path, God just directed me into this spot where it was clear. Teach the Bible, love the church, work with university students, and inspire strategy to see churches planted. That's my lane. But I couldn't have even named that. I don't think 6, 7 years ago. I couldn't have named it till I was after 30 years old. But I just was trying to befriend faithfulness, and on the path of faithfulness, God led to fruitful ministry.
Man, great word. Yeah. So you jumped on Salt Co. You left the guitar, the capo. You left all that behind.
Left the guitar and the capo behind. I have rarely sung a Chris Tomlin song since. So I love you, Chris. Everybody loves you. I mean, you sold 12 bajillion records. How great is Chris Tomlin? So I left that behind, went and jumped onto Salt Company staff 7.5 years ago.
All right, so you jumped on that staff. Now, did you jump on as the Salt Co director at that time? Not
initially. I was working as the associate director with a guy, Cody Klein, who's just a tremendous leader, really godly guy, organizationally brilliant, and taught me a ton about how do you help run a big thing with clarity and consistency. Cody and I worked together for about a year and a half, and then Cody transitioned to kind of head up some of the community side ministry at Cornerstone, and I moved into the role of Salt Company director then, and served in that role for about the next 4 years roughly.
Okay. Yep. So at this point, I mean, Salt Co is one of the nation's largest college ministries, over 1,000 students on a weekly basis. What did you, as you went from that college career type of, and then into Salt Co, directing Salt Co, how did God begin to change in your heart and your mind? Because I would imagine that changed and you realize how strategic the generation is, but what did God do in that time?
I started working with university students because when I taught the Bible, they moved toward me. I didn't know that actually the impact of my life was not so much getting them to move toward me, but sending them out into the harvest. Even when I started with Salt Company, I fell in love with it because it's like this incredible dynamic college ministry. It was probably the innovative shift for me in ministry was realizing that when you have a dynamic college ministry connected to a dynamic church, you actually have a synergy that's the seedbed for church planting movement. I didn't see that. We were just trying to do a great job with Salt Company and love it, but when we stumbled, kind of backed our way into church planting at Cornerstone, and what we realized is if you do more than just have a great 4-year experience, but through the 4 years of a university student's time, you're discipling them to be a certain sort of church-loving, Jesus-loving, lost people, heat-seeking, missional like missile. If you disciple them toward that, you're going to release them to something. In our unique context, Ames, Iowa, no one moves to Ames, Iowa to stay. No one moves. I mean, audience in Texas, if you want to come visit Ames, I don't know why, but you're welcome. So, like, Ames is not a destination town, so we always had to send people out. What we realized is we were just haphazardly doing that. Like, hey, we love you, you love Jesus, go for it. Get involved in the mission of God, right? Well, we kind of backed our way into this. While I was director, we started asking the question, what would happen if we could plant a church like Cornerstone in a town like Ames with a ministry like Salt Company, and we asked these people graduating to like go there and do it. And so during Salt Company, we reorganized all of our discipleship processes to make them into a church planting pipeline. So the way we say is we say Salt Company is a church planting machine disguised as a college ministry. And what we found now is every church plant we would send out, and we've done in the last 10 years as a church, I think probably 14 or 15 church plants now, and the majority of those in the last 6 years aligned with that process. Every church plant we goes with a core team of 40, 50, like tithing, job earning, college graduate members who help plant the church forward. So it was just this incredible thing where when I came in, I had no idea that was what God wanted to do. I was just trying to befriend faithfulness and walk with Him. And God kind of stumbled us into the strategy. And now that we see it, it's clear and refined. And so my contribution to Salt Company was teach the Bible and line up this ministry for the maximum long-term church planting kingdom impact.
So you guys just got in the midst of having what we'd say a thriving college ministry, you realized we weren't being strategic with post-graduation.
Oh, not at all.
And you guys got really strategic, say we want to plant churches. And so how long were you director?
I was director about 4 years.
4
Salt
years.
Company. Yep.
All right. So you directed that for 4 years, and then has it been a year and a half? How long?
About a year and a half, a little over. I started. So we kind of went through a transition process, right? We began that transition process kind of like the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, where we knew our founding pastor and lead pastor, Troy Nesbitt, was ready to transition to the next stage for him, which was going to be actually leading the SALT network, kind of our church planting movement wing of our church.
So hold on, let me pause there. So when you guys got strategic, say we wanted to send, it got to the point where like, yo, we need a network. Like we need somebody to head this up. Like that's how strategic it got. So Troy left to head that up.
Yeah, he left the lead pastor role to head this up because this thing is starting to like, oh, this is work, like God's in this. This is where God's at work. And Troy's great strength is he is just like a starter entrepreneur catalyst. He wants to be like charging the hill. He does not. So Cornerstone at that point is a mega church that requires management, instruction, all that. And Troy's thinking, I don't love doing that. I loved starting this. How do I get back to starting? And so the SALT network gave a chance for his unique gifts to be used. So we could see that. We could see God was calling him to that. And so as he said, this is my next. I want to take this. He initiated a leadership transition process to move me in to replace him as a lead pastor. And so kind of began that process in 2016, realized the kind of actual formal handoff in 2018. So I was taking pieces to what Cornerstone leadership meant throughout 2016 to 2018. As Troy led the network, Jeff Dodge, who was the teaching pastor, kind of was like an interim lead. And then I would take pieces of leadership to Cornerstone to the point where when we did it at the beginning of 2018, so this is a little over a year and a half ago, it was pretty just oh yeah, this is what we've been doing.
Yeah.
And so it was a huge moment for the life of our church, but something that had been orchestrated consistently, slowly over time.
So you went from being Salt Company director, kind of second chair, third chair, whatever you want to say, to now you're the lead pastor of the church. What's the significant change there between those two seats you're in?
Well, the SALT director role is more fun.
Yep. Yeah.
Because working with university students all the time is a blast.
Yeah.
And honestly, I have to give a lot of credit in this to Troy. Troy, he said this phrase for years and years. He said, listen, most key leaders in the church hang on a decade too long. I want to leave a decade too early.
Yeah.
So he was convinced what happens is they hang on because they're afraid of what should be next for them.
Yeah.
And as such, they lose touch with the next generation. He said, to be a next generation church, we need a next generation leadership team. And that means I'm going to hand off sooner rather than later and not be afraid of what God has for me on the other side.
Yeah.
So he deserves tremendous credit for that. When he initiated that, though, he also set it up so that at Cornerstone, one of our deepest values is like true flourishing plurality, where there's never just, like there's always a point leader, but there's a plurality of teams surrounding him. So even Troy, to this day, offices right next to me. Like this morning before the interview, I'm talking with him on the phone.
Yeah.
So he's one of the closest relationships I have in the world. So I'm always, hey, Troy, how would you do this? How would you set this up? And so actually, the shift from SALT director to lead pastor happened so gradually that the pieces of leadership. So before I was a lead pastor, I was teaching 30% of the time on Sundays as the SALT director. So the people of the church knew who I was. Before I became the lead pastor, I was the director of staff. So all the staff structures and organization reported through me. So I knew how the budget worked. So I had been prepared stage by stage by stage, so that by the time I moved formally into the lead pastor role, to be frank, inside the room, it almost felt like I dropped responsibilities, not added them.
Okay.
Because I had been doing SALT directorship while doing all these other pieces. And so I don't teach much more than what I taught before. I'm doing the same sorts of leading. So I'm getting to the question now. The biggest significant shift was I felt the weight of responsibility at a different level, and I felt the weight of the stewardship that God had entrusted to us, that I had to keep us aligned to the vision He gave.
Yeah.
Like my theme is, cultivating this faithfulness, befriending faithfulness. We have a vision that God gave us to be a multi-generational church that reaches and engages the university campus. And there are forces inside the life of any church that move you away from that being your priority.
Yep.
They don't pay the bills.
Yep.
It means that your church is like louder than most people really like. Like there's all of these forces for why the average church is going to move away from that. And at the size of Cornerstone, the forces of an average megachurch are that people come in the door as consumers and say, you should be able to do everything really well. And you're going to do everything really well because you're a big church. And so the force moves you towards spending more and more and more of your money to be a marginally bigger megachurch. Diminishing the return on investment for the gospel, but just putting all your energy into, man, we just got to have the best children's program, the best this, and you play to the consumerism, and you spend all your time to be a marginally bigger megachurch. And we decided intentionally as a church that God had called us to be a movemental church planting church. So that what we say is we shifted our focus from trying to be marginally bigger mega to being a planting, mothering, multiplying movement church. And so that, I think that's the biggest shift in me, is now my job is to lash us to the mast, like Ulysses in the Odyssey. I'm trying to tie our church to the purpose that God gave, so that we realize in actuality like what it means to be sacrificially generous, what it means to plant, what it means to send your best, what it means to love the next generation. So I'm not really doing anything new. I'm just holding us to what God's called us to be in faithfulness. And I think the biggest shift is I feel the weight of holding that. Yeah.
So how do you, again, I think every church naturally will drift away from that. So what kind of guards, or what are you guys doing as a church to help keep aligned with your vision, your values?
You're dead right that every church will drift. if you imagine it, if you've ever seen the 3 circles, so I'm just going to describe this.
Yeah.
If you imagine like circle 1 as these churches here, this represents a type of church in North America where it's a dying church.
Mm-hmm.
And the mantra of churches in this first circle is, please stay here.
Mm-hmm.
Please stay.
Mm-hmm.
We're dying. We need you to stay.
Yeah.
This is a lot of churches, man.
Yeah.
Okay, move 1 circle over. This next circle, this is actually, if this is a subtraction church, this is the addition church. We're growing.
Yep.
People are coming in the doors. The mantra of this church is, please come.
Mm-hmm.
Please come and see what God's doing. This is really cool. I want you to go 1 more circle, the final circle here. And this church is actually a multiplying church.
Mm-hmm.
And if that church said, please stay, and this church said, please come, this church says, please go.
Mm-hmm.
They have realized what J.D. Greear talks about, that it's actually gaining by losing. That sending more than seating capacity is the ultimate measure of gospel effectiveness. So we're saying, please go. This is where we want to be. What I'm going to tell you is the forces draw you to the center circle.
Yeah.
The first church desperately just wants more people to be coming in the doors.
Yep.
But the majority of people, it is far more comfortable to say, we're always going to spend more and more money to have a better program than it is to say, we're actually going to cut our budgets to give away more to fuel movement. That doesn't actually make me feel better.
Yeah.
And so there are actually forces on both circles trying to push you to the middle.
Yeah.
And so to keep, like, how do you keep in circle 5? Like, how do you make that happen? I think there's a lot of things you have to do. You have to be really ultra clear with the core leaders that this is the mission God called us to, and this is what success looks like. We had to change our scorecards of success.
Yeah.
We had to stop talking endlessly about like seating capacity. How many people were in the service? How many were... We know what those things are, but those are part of a scorecard. They're not the whole scorecard. We had to talk a lot more about what real gospel movement looks like. And honestly, this is the key. We had to keep university ministry at the front and center of what the church was going to be about. Because if you want to fuel a movement, you don't just need dollars, you need leaders. The harvest is plentiful. The laborers are what's few.
Yeah.
And so we find that the university ministry is the pipeline of leadership coming up through who are laborers for what God's calling us to. And so what I've tried to do is just keep those values front and center and celebrate them and talk about them and drip them all over so that the church smells what winning is actually gaining by losing. Winning as a church is not just celebrating a huge Easter service. So we celebrated. We had 5,000 people in our Easter services. Incredible. But every time we said that publicly, we said, but guys, in the network of churches that we've been part of planting the last 10 years, there were over 10,000 in their Easter services. And that got the bigger applause. That's what we want to hear. We want to hear that movement, not just marginally bigger, is what drives us.
So we think about, again, when you said we didn't want to become a marginally, how did you
We
frame
call
that?
it, we said, the phrase we use is we didn't just want to be a marginally bigger mega church.
Yeah.
We wanted to be a multiplying church.
So let's think, even if, let's say, I don't know, what's typical Sunday?
About around 3,000-ish.
Around 3,000. So let's say, if you were to add 1,000 people, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of people.
That's 4,000.
Yeah.
But since you planted, that's total from Easter was 15,000, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So obviously,
Yeah.
addition is great, and I think it kind of coddles us for the moment, but ultimately sending and multiplying, you're seeing that multiplication play out.
Yeah, that's right.
Because you're willing to
That's
say
right.
go.
Let's take the university ministry. Okay, Salt Company Ames, average week would be about 1,500. So that's a huge college
Yeah.
ministry. Outside of Ames, the churches that we've started in the last, since 2010, when we really the majority in the last 5 years, outside of Ames is 2,000 plus every week.
Wow.
And so what you're seeing is actually what took us 40 plus years to grow in Ames. In 5 years, you could grow through movement.
Wow.
And so you just have to decide, do you want to play addition or multiplication? But to get from addition to multiplication requires you to do things that are costly, sacrificial, and actually pretty awkward and counterintuitive to the average church. Yeah.
Wow, man. Well, that's good. Well, Mark, I appreciate your time. I love getting to hang out with you to hear the perspective more on the pastoral side now with just guarding the vision and even, us helping us transition from thinking about addition to thinking about multiplication and seeing how really that in a short period of time, how you begin to influence, man, just other areas beyond just Ames. So,
Well, and man, I want to like reassure pastors
Yeah.
too. I think this is scary to
Yeah.
guys. When you say you're going to gain by losing, they think, yeah, but the board that I work with, the people that I know, they want to see gaining by adding.
yeah.
So let me just give this. So we have sent hundreds out in the last 5 years, okay? Hundreds and hundreds of people. And in the middle of sending hundreds and hundreds of people, God has actually grown the size of our church locally. Because when people get a gospel heart to go to a new town, they also have a gospel heart to go to their neighbor. And so missional movement that expands the kingdom and planting also actually grew our church. So while we reduced our budgets on what we would spend internally, while we pushed back the idea of just running a bigger show to get in more people, God added more people to our number when we were faithful to the harvest outside there. So if you're about getting to people who are lost and you're willing to send to go to them, you will figure out that the people inside your church will catch a heart to go to their neighbor. And so don't be afraid that you're going to die if you send. Listen, if you have to die because you sinned, and that's what God calls you to for movement, we should be willing to make that sacrifice. But our church has found that actually it has more rapidly aligned our church and grown our church than just about anything we've done to get on mission together.
Wow, man.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
It's been amazing.